I'm 95 years old. I am reporting to you from the finish line of a race you don't even realize you rerunning, and let me tell you something you're losing. I've buried my parents, my brother Thomas, who used to hum Stardust when he was nervous, and finally I buried Helen. From this vantage point, looking back across nearly a century, the view isn't poetic, it isn't blessed. It's a ledger of wasted breath. You think you have time, you move through your house like an immortal, treating the person sitting across from you at the dinner table like a permanent fixture of the architecture. You're wrong. You are a biological clock leaking seconds into a cracked bucket, and you're too arrogant to notice the floor is soaking wet. Why are you so terrified of a moment of genuine connection? Is it because it requires you to actually be awake? You'd rather hide behind the busy lie. You'd rather scroll through the lives of strangers than look into the eyes of the person who knows exactly how you take your coffee. Answer me this: when was the last time you actually saw your partner? I don't mean a glance over the rim of your phone. I mean, when was the last time you looked at the new lines around their eyes and realized they grew there while you were looking at a screen? When was the last time you felt the heat of their skin and didn't immediately pull away because you had emails to catch up on? How many more Tuesdays do you think you have left? 550? 5? You don't know, but you act like the supply is infinite. September 3rd, 1971. I remember the date because it was a Friday, and the air in our kitchen in Ohio was heavy with the smell of fried ham and the lingering humidity of a dying summer. The linoleum was peeling at the corners, and the refrigerator hummed a low mechanical B-flat. Helen was wearing a yellow floral apron. She looked soft in the evening light. Our song, the one from the night we met at the community hall, started playing on the transistor radio. It was scratchy, competing with the static of the local station, but the melody was unmistakable. She turned away from the stove, wiped her hands on her apron, and reached out. Her palms were damp, and she had that look in her eyes, the one that said she was still the girl from 1952, the one who believed I was the center of her world. "Dance with me," she said, not a demand, a prayer. I felt the pull. For a second, I almost moved, but the television in the next room was blaring the pre-game highlights. I could hear the roar of the crowd, the frantic energy of a game that wouldn't matter to anyone 48 hours later. My shoulders felt heavy, that artificial weight I always carried back then, the stress of a middle manager who thought he was carrying the weight of the world. "Not now, honey," I said, eyes already drifting toward the doorway. "The game is starting. I've had a long week. I'm tired." I didn't look at her face when I said it. I walked into the living room, sat in my leather recliner, and let the flickering blue light of the tube wash over me. I felt productive. I felt like I was recovering. I didn't know that on that Friday night, in a kitchen smelling of ham and static, I was making a choice that would echo for 22 years. I thought I was just skipping a dance. I didn't realize I was closing a door. Helen never asked again, not once, not for 22 years. She stayed, she cooked, she cleaned the mud off my boots. But that specific invitation, that raw, vulnerable reach for a moment of shared joy, died right there on the linoleum. I fell into the waiting room trap. I spent my marriage waiting for the right time to be happy. I was waiting for the promotion to be over, waiting for the kids to graduate, waiting for the mortgage to be paid, waiting for a version of life that didn't feel so heavy. I treated my life with Helen like a dress rehearsal for a play that was never actually going to open. I thought the real part of our life was somewhere in the future, tucked away in a retirement folder. I was wrong. The kitchen was the stage, the song was the play. And I walked off set because I wanted to watch a bunch of men I didn't know chase a ball across a field of grass I'd never stand on. Time doesn't vanish all at once. It's not a sudden bankruptcy. It's a slow, rhythmic leak that you convince yourself is just the sound of the house settling. That night in 1971 wasn't a cliff. It was the start of a long gray slope. By 1980, the silence in our house had its own weight. We moved around each other like ghosts in a shared haunting. I'd come home, the soles of my shoes heavy with the dust of the office, and I'd see her sitting by the window. The light would catch the gray in her hair that used to smell like rain and lilac but now just smelled like laundry detergent. I'd think to myself, I should take her out Friday. We'll talk then. But Friday would come, and the status quo was a seductive mistress. It was easier to sit in the recliner. It was easier to complain about the heat or the cold or the noise the neighbor's dog made. I told myself I was being a good husband because I provided. I brought home the check. I fixed the leak in the roof. I was building a future, I thought. But you can't live in a future. It's a phantom. You can only live in the damp, cold now, and I was choosing to spend my nows in a state of perpetual irritation. I did the math once. It was after the house went quiet for good, sitting at a kitchen table that felt 3 times larger than it used to be. I took out a yellow legal pad and a pencil, and I sat there until my eyes burned. 14,965 days, that's what we had. From the moment we said I do in that drafty church until the moment the heart monitor in room 412 turned into a single, unending note, I looked at those days and I started subtracting. I subtracted the 11,000 days I spent being too tired. I subtracted the mornings I spent staring at a newspaper instead of her face. I subtracted the evenings I spent ruminating on a slight from a boss who replaced me within 48 hours of my retirement. When the ink dried, the truth was a gut punch. I was actually present for 3,200 of them, only 22%. I spent 78% of my marriage, the only life I will ever have, waiting for the right conditions to be happy. I was a victim of a cruel arithmetic. I thought if I put in the work now, I'd get the reward later, but the reward was her. The reward was the 11,765 days I treated as obstacles to be cleared. I lost 282,360 hours of intimacy because I was stressed about things that quite literally do not exist anymore. By 1985, the erosion was complete. We didn't fight. Fights require energy. They require a belief that something is worth saving. We just settled. We became roommates who shared a last name and a bathroom. I'd see a dress she bought and think she looked nice, but the words would get stuck in the back of my throat, choked out by the habit of saying nothing. I was waiting for a special occasion to tell her she was beautiful. I was saving my best self for a vacation that kept getting pushed back, for a retirement that was always 5 years away. I didn't realize that by the time we reached the after, there would be nothing left of us but 2 tired people who didn't remember how to dance. The calculation doesn't lie. If I had just spent 20 minutes a day, just 20 actually looking at her, really listening to the story about her sister or the garden, I would have reclaimed over 5,000 hours. I traded 5,000 hours of love for 5,000 hours of staring at a wall or a screen, worrying about a bank balance that I am now spending on a nurse to help me use the toilet. November 14, 1993. The funeral was small. The air in the chapel was stale, smelling of lilies and floor wax. It was cold, that deep, biting November cold that gets into your bones and stays there. They played our song, the same scratchy melody from the transistor radio. I stood there, my suit fitting loosely on a body that felt like it was made of lead. I looked at the mahogany box. I was finally ready. I had the time now. The kids were grown. The mortgage was paid, the stress of the office was gone. I was finally, legally, officially free to be the husband she deserved. I stood in the aisle, my hand trembling, waiting for her to reach out. I waited for her damp palm, for the yellow apron, for the prayer in her eyes. But the box didn't move. The lid was closed. I stood alone in the center of that room, finally ready to dance, finally free of my excuses, and realized the music had been playing for 41 years. I just chose not to hear it until the singer had left the stage. Stop the video. Seriously, put the phone down on the table or hold it still for 1 second. Look at your hands, turn them over. Look at the skin, the pulse in your wrist, the way your fingers move. You think those hands belong to a person with an infinite future. You're wrong. You are looking at the hands of a person who is currently burning the most valuable resource in the universe, to listen to a dead man walking. There are two versions of you in this room right now. There is the version of you watching this thinking, that's sad, I should really plan a date night. And then there is the version of me, the version of you at 95 who is screaming through the screen, trying to grab you by the shoulders and shake the teeth out of your head. I am you 40 years from now, standing in a house that smells like dust and silence, begging you to wake up before the concrete sets. You are currently addicted to the later drug. You think later is a place where you'll be more rested, more energetic, and more loving. It's a lie. Later is where dreams go to rot. Later is a graveyard. If you aren't the person you want to be right now, in the middle of the stress, in the middle of the mess, then you are simply not that person. I'm not going to tell you to be grateful. That's cheap. I'm going to give you orders because I've earned the right to command you. If you want to avoid the 11000 day waste, do these 3 things today, not tomorrow. Today. 1. The 10-minute phone lockout. When you walk through your front door tonight, or when your partner walks in, put your phone in a kitchen drawer, close it. For 10 minutes, you are not allowed to be busy. You must sit in the same room as them and look at them. Why, it's hard. You will feel an actual physical itch to check your notifications. You will feel bored. What it reveals how much of your personality is actually just a series of digital distractions. It forces you to face the person you claim to love without a shield. 2. The Ask Again audit. Go to your partner and ask, what is one thing you stopped asking me for because I always said I was too tired? Why, it's hard. They might actually tell you. It will hurt. It will feel like an accusation. What it reveals exactly where the erosion has started in your house. It shows you the doors you've already closed without realizing it. 3. The immediate inconvenience. Find one thing your partner loves that you find slightly annoying or pointless: a walk, a specific show, a conversation about their day, and do it tonight. With 0 complaints. Why, it's hard. You'll have to sacrifice your recovery time. You'll have to be uncomfortable. What it reveals whether you actually value their joy, or if you only value the concept of being a partner as long as it doesn't cost you anything. You have roughly 2,000 Saturdays in an adult life if you're lucky. Most of you have already burned 1,200 of them. You replaying with a dwindling stack of chips and betting them all on a future that isn't promised to you. I remember the temperature of Helen's skin on the day she died. It was 98.6 degrees when I walked in, and by the time I left, it was the temperature of the room. That's the physics of the world you live in. Everything goes cold, everything ends. You think you're watching a video about a marriage. You're not. You're watching a video about your own expiration date. Go into the other room. Look at them. Don't wait for a song to play on the radio. Don't wait for the game to end. Dance now or prepare to dance alone.